Okay, moving right along. This has had plenty of time to cure. Started on the build in the morning before I had to go. And we'll move on to the rear fuselage stiffener braces. These can be glued on right side up or upside down, however you choose. You can cut a 45-degree bevel on these. It's not necessary, it'll just make for a cleaner installation. And I'm going to put mine on right side up. And we'll just run a bead of glue, if I can get this here on the camera. Run a bead of glue down this. Make sure you got a good bead. Which is kind of hard to do when you're trying to keep the stuff in front of the camera. And watch the camera to make sure that it's all in frame. But you get the idea. And if you're going to overdo it anywhere on the glue, this would be the area to do it. But just try to get a good bead. You don't want to waste glue, and you don't want to tack on a lot of extra unneeded weight with huge amounts of glue that you don't really need. And it's the same thing for the other side. So we'll just show one so we're not eating up a lot of video or time watching. Okay, once you got beads on both edges, you'll lay these down on about a 45-degree angle. Keep in mind your servos are going to come through, and also your push rod guides. Put this on about a 45-degree angle and come back about to the bevel for the elevator. And keep an eye on the fuse, make sure it's still at 90. You can go over with your finger and push in the excess. Okay, we've installed both the rear fuselage stiffeners, bracing. While we're letting that tack up and cure, we'll move on to the stiffener for the elevator. Let's see if we can get that in there. Just a nice bead on there, and then when we put that on, it'll squeeze over the rest of it really good. You could just rub back and forth and get it smeared really good so that it's a nice thin layer of glue, and it'll tack up a little quicker, and then apply it. But I'm just going to slide that on and then move it around a little bit to make sure the glue gets all over. And just try to center this well, and just move it back and forth a little bit. A little excess glue squeezing out isn't going to hurt you. And just make sure you don't get into the actual hinge. just push down. We'll let that tack up and we'll move on to the next step. Also, just to make sure everything's still straight and true, use your tape measure again and check the distance between the tip of the aileron and the tip of the elevator. And if anything's off slightly, just correct before it tacks up and cures. Okay, this has had plenty of time to set up, so it's nice and cured. If you're going to leave landing gear off and go for a lighter setup, you can just set that to the side, or we can install that now. Landing gear weighs about 5 or 6 grams, so it is a significant amount of weight if you leave it off. Just go through and get it on a good angle. Put a little dab of glue where you pierced through the horizontal fuselage for it. Just work it back and forth to get a nice bead of glue around it. A little bit more. Spin around until the bead is nice and even. Let that tack up a little bit once you're sure you've got it nice and even. You can go back in, add welder into the slot that's cut out. If you want a little extra strength there, you can use some of the scrap and put that in there, but I'm going to leave mine like this. It's, unless you really crash hard and tear off the gear or something, there's not really a lot of stress there. You may choose to install a landing gear as one of your last steps, but I've installed mine. Quick thing to go over, check that they're level. Mine's tacked up a little bit, turn the plane over, make sure it's nice and level. Before it completely tacks up, you can make minor adjustments. The measurement from the vertical fuse to where the landing gear pierces into the horizontal fuse is 1 inch. The reason I suggest possibly doing this at a later point is you want to make sure that once you have your aileron servo installed and the push rods are installed, that there's no binding when you go to full deflection and there's no touching, but it should be fine like this. But just something to keep in mind, depending on how you position your push rods and if you use the included offset arm, you may want to do that last. Or you might even just leave the gear off altogether if you're going for the lightest possible setup. So we're going to move on to the next step, which is installing the upper vertical fuse, and we'll be throwing on the rudder and the SFGs. This is pretty straightforward, just like the rest of the build we've been doing. Just put yourself a little bit of welder's foam tack or whatever contact adhesive type glue, or even CA you wish to use. Personally, I stick with the welders and the beacon. Both work well. And because we already have the lower vertical fuse installed we'll go over all the tabs too now. This will lock them together. For the lower vertical fuse, we didn't place glue at the tops of the tabs. Hope that's all making it on the camera. And you don't need a huge bead because this is going to compress and fill in the rest of the area. And optional, you don't have to do it, but like I did on lower fuse, just to give it a better bond, and basically works like lubrication to help it slide into the slots better. I'm putting a little bit on the side. Just go over and make sure any spots you may have missed you fill back in. And if you're going to go heavy on the welders anywhere, in particular, do it around the nose. That's going to have the most stress with the torque from the motor. And being an EPP plane, you're going to have a lot of fun flying it, and you'll probably crash it occasionally. So around the nose area, if you're going to go a little heavy on the glue, that's the area to go heavier at. And up till this point, I've probably used about half the tube of welders. If you're using an entire tube of welders, you're probably going on pretty thick with the glue. You should have plenty left. Usually I can get about 2 planes out of 1 tube of welders. And just to make this easier, might not pick it up on the camera, but just go to all the slots and put your tabs in. And just compress. Make sure you got these all seated well. In particular, make sure this is nice and even and adjust as necessary so that your motor mount doesn't have any adverse down thrust, up thrust, left or right. Let's see if you can pick that up on the camera. This area right here, make sure that's all nice and square and level. The aileron servo doesn't have to be installed. You can install it if you prefer. I'll leave that for later. It'll slide right in there, no problem. And just seat everything down really good. Make sure you got a good fit. Check it front to back. I don't know if it makes it on the camera. Make sure that's all nice and at a 90-degree angle. And we'll set that aside and let that tack up. And we'll come back in a little bit and we'll put the rudder on and the side force generators. We could even do that now. Remember, you've got two different sizes. The smaller ones go to the outside, the larger ones go more inward. We'll put the larger ones on right now. Just run some welders inside. Okay, you can pick that up on the camera. And then also, like I do with the tabs and the vertical fuse pieces, just run a little bit here on the edge on each piece. That'll just help it slide in with a little bit less friction from the foam on foam. Okay, we'll just do one. I think you get the gist of it. And pull it apart. And these are symmetrical, so there's not an upside down or a right side up. We'll just do one to keep the video a little shorter and follow the same steps for the other three. Okay, we've let the upper fuse tack up for a little bit. We're going to install the rudder. Try and get this in the can. If you notice, I placed a T-pin here, and that's just to support the rear of the fuselage. You can also use the T-pins to hold pieces in place. It may be useful for some to use T-pins to hold these in place. They're inexpensive and they'll last for years. I also use them to hold all the control surfaces in a stable position while installing push rods. Just a little tip. You could also use painter's tape, but the T-pins work very well and they're reusable, so I use them. Okay, for the rudder install, if I can keep from dropping glue. I think the fumes are getting to me. Okay, let me see if I got this in the camera. We're going to place it in this area opposed to there because part of that area comes right here. So you won't be needing any glue on that. You don't want it to potentially get onto here. And just put a nice bead on there. Might have to. There we go. Put a good bead on there. And then do the same for the upper part. That's in the camera. My stomach's growling. Can you tell I'm hungry? Okay. And just line this up. Go from right there. Line up your printing for the graphics. And then once you've got that attached, it's kind of hard to do this with the camera here. Just rub it back and forth. Get a good amount of glue on both surfaces. And as you can see, we've got there. We've got plenty there, and you got the little strings that you can just take off with your fingers. Let that tack up for a little bit, and install that and move on to the next step. Okay, everything's had plenty of time to dry. We're going to move on to the next step, which is installing the tail skid. You're just going to go in here and make a cut. I already pre-slit this. In the hardware pack, you'll have a couple of small, so damn small I can't even pick it up. There you go. You'll have 3 carbon rods, 2 identical size, 1 smaller. The smaller one is going to go in the rear for a tail skid, and it's also going to give a bit more support to the tail. What you're going to want to do is just add some welder glue in here and then run it around a little bit with your carbon rod. Prior to doing that, you might want to scuff it up a little bit. Got a little sanding pad. Just run it through there, back and forth. That'll just give it better adhesion to the glue. I don't know if you can see that. You should be able to. And we'll just go and run that back and forth a little bit. Get plenty of glue on that rod. And plenty of glue in between where we made our cut. And you can just lightly pierce the foam with it. Get on a good angle so it elevates the tail a little bit. Basically what it's going to do is prevent the rudder from hitting the ground on landings, etc. Just pinch that together. Make sure the glue gets spread out in there well. And make sure it's got a little bit of an angle. And that step's done. Next step is installing the plywood motor mount. And if you notice, I use a Sharpie to make a little center point. That way you know you've got your plywood motor mount on perfectly straight and not offset. And once again, we covered a little bit earlier, make sure the nose is completely straight and level. That way you won't get any offset down or up thrust. There is a bit of adjustment provided in the slot, so you can slide the upper back or forth as well as the lower vertical fuse. If you inadvertently have this uneven, you can trim that with an X-Acto. Another thing you can do is just place this on here and make a couple marks. Make sure you've got it centered. Just make some reference points to lay down your beads of glue. And as you can see, you got reference points there. And you can glob it on pretty good in this area. Some of it's going to squeeze out, but this is probably one of the most vulnerable areas on a foam plane or any plane. So a little extra isn't going to hurt here. and just work that side to side a little bit. A little bit of glue there. As you can see, we got a good amount of glue there and a good amount on here. We're going to let this tack up for a little bit, and we'll move on to one of the next steps. Okay, our next step is to install the carbon rod support for the tail. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to put this on about a 45-degree angle and make a mark about a 1/4 inch or so to the inside of each end of the rod. And then we'll pierce through either with the rod itself with a twisting motion on the mark we made below and slide all the way through, then come back up and pierce through the upper side. I've already done this side. Scuff up about a 1/4 inch of the rod so that it's a bit gritty and it'll adhere, the glue will adhere to it better. Just stick it in your tube of welder and twist around a little bit, get a nice little glob on there. And then the reference marks and where you pull through, just push through and twist, get a nice bead where it pierces, and then slide it back into the top position too. Make sure everything's square. Check the alignment of the wing as a reference point and adjust as necessary. Also check your counterbalances to make sure the stab isn't crooked in any way, and that looks good. In order to speed things up, I popped out all the pieces from the light ply hardware pack that we'll be using. 2 of the push rod guides are extras. The shorter of the 6 here are the ones that will go near the control surfaces at the tail of the plane, and the longer ones go forward more towards the servos. And they just pop out easily with an X-Acto and pop out the little disc in the guides. If you've got a non-computer radio or shorter servo arms, you can also use these, pop these out, and that way you can get maximum deflection and full 45-degree or more 3D throws. On all of the control horns for the control surfaces, we've drilled out with a number 48 bit, and that'll let the adjustable pushrod connectors fit in. And we'll install that stuff too. You just use one washer and a little bit of Loctite to secure each one. You don't want to tighten these down too much. You just want them to be slightly snug. You don't want any friction here or your servos will strain. And we'll do one, and then you can see the rest. Just keep track of the orientation. These adjusters should be outward this way for the ailerons, and for the rudder, that one will be in a downward position, and the elevator will also be in the same position with the adjustable pushrod connector off to the right. So rather than waste time, we'll put a little Loctite on one and put the nut on it, and then you can do the rest, and then we'll install them. Okay, we're going to try and speed things up a little bit here. I'm running a little bit long on the runtime on these videos. We already pre-sanded about an inch of the carbon rod. We'll do one of them, and then the rest just follow the same step. You can use either a heat gun or a lighter. We're just going to heat up a little bit with this. Once you got that done, I'm going to take some CA, and I like to use these applicators anytime I use CA, especially in confined areas or something that's hard to reach. That way you're not going to get the whole bottle on. I'm just going to use this one I've already used before. Let's take a nice dose of the CA. Make sure we got this on camera. Make sure you don't get on the Z-bend itself, but you want it to wick down. As you can see, it's coming out the other end. And take some kicker. Doesn't matter what kind, it could be aerosol or a little pump spray bottle like this. And you're done. Okay. And this one is for the elevator. Okay, we pre-did this one, and we'll install that. And all your control horns, you're going to need to drill with a number 48 drill bit through the center hole to make it large enough to accept these adjustable push rod keepers. Note we've got the shorter, or the push rod guides going towards the rear. The shorter push rod guides are the ones used for the tail near the control surfaces, and the longer ones are mounted closer to the servos. What we're going to do here is just put some CA or some welder into the push rod guide slots. You want plenty of glue in there to hold those in good. And we'll put a little bit on each one of the guides. You can do this like I am pre-assembled, or you can do the control horns, put those in, and then install the rest. Also, we're going to do the control horn here too. In the first part of this video build, we marked the locations for the cutouts for the control horns. I'll throw some pictures into the video from RC Plane Builder that give you the exact dimensions again in case you might have missed them. For the servos, depending on the type of servos you use, these are the recommended ones. These got a pretty firm fit in here. The control horns for the servos, servo arms, are going to be situated towards the rear of the plane. And to install them, they slide in the wire. Hopefully this is on camera. Slide in the wire, and then the side that the wire comes out on the servo, try and get that in first so you don't crimp the wire. And just wiggle and push, and they should slide into the foam. If you're using slightly larger servos, or if you feel the slot is too tight, you can always relieve a little bit. There we go. And once we got these in, the way I secure them, I just use a little bit of hot glue. Make sure all your servos are centered. You can take off the arms and install the end of the push rod, or just slide it back through. Now, for the offset arm, you can do it a couple of ways. I'm going to use some screws and a little bit of CA. You want to use a double-sided arm, and on the double-sided arm you'll probably have a little bit of a ridge here. You can either, scrape away with an X-Acto or a small file or a Dremel, but you want to have that flush. Then get the arm centered, and you could just glue it on like this without any screws and use some thread. And whether you have Kevlar thread or just some sewing thread wrapped around several times, it'll lock that in there pretty good. I'm just going to go with some screws for now. Okay, we had to open up the holes on the servo arm a little bit to accept the screws. We're just going to add a little CA now. And make sure you do this step with the control horn off of the servo. You don't want it to get into the gear train or the spline and bind up the servo. Hit this with a little kicker. Okay, now that step's done. Okay, we'll turn it over. And the orientation for this is with the extended part of the arms going forward. May have to press against the foam a little bit to get this on. Once again, make sure all your servos, if they're not already centered, center them prior to doing this. We'll make our cuts for our aileron control horns and install those, and then we'll come back. Then we'll install the rest of the push rods and move on to okay, we're all finished. In order to speed things up, I installed the motor and ESC and receiver and everything. You can see right here, the CG point is 13 to 17 millimeters behind the main spar. And we made our cutout and balanced accordingly. Where you place your pack will vary depending on the motor and pack you use. I'll place ESC up top just because I'll be running a lot of different setups in it. You can place it below and either zip tie or use some hot glue or double-sided tape or whatever you prefer. It's all ready to fly. Hopefully these videos have been helpful to the newer guys flying EPP planes or someone that's never seen one assembled.